Welcome everybody to this month's Community Roundtable conversation. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I host these conversations about once every month, and it's an opportunity for me to bring together a panel of various experts in the industry for us to have a panel conversation about different topics related to e-learning and instructional design, talent development, learning and development in general. And it's also an opportunity for you to ask questions to them as well. So a couple of quick housekeeping items. Obviously, participate in chat. I see many of you already are, but you will notice that above the chat panel on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side, there is a little questions tab. So as we're doing our panel conversation, you can submit any questions you have for me or the panel, and you can upvote on questions. So make sure you put those there. That way I can easily track them. And we'll start answering those during the second half of the call. So I want to welcome my panel here today. We have a really fantastic group, and today we're focusing and talking about interviewing for e-learning and instructional design jobs. And before I have the panel introduce themselves and tell us what companies they work for and the types of teams they manage, the reason I wanted to do today's session or this community roundtable is I'm sure many of you have spent some time on LinkedIn before or online, and there's so many people giving advice about interviewing for jobs and applying for jobs and how to, make yourself a competitive candidate. But the thing that I always find remarkable is that sometimes the people who are giving the most advice, sometimes the loudest people in the room, have never managed people. They've never managed teams. They've never been a hiring manager. Some of them have never even worked in a corporate environment. And so I figured, why don't we just go to the source? Let's go to people who actually are doing this today, right now, so that you can ask them questions and understand from their perspective. We can kind of go beyond the hype and really understand, what is it that hiring managers are looking for? And, you can better understand their side of the coin. Because I've been a hiring manager before, and it's amazing how much you don't know about the hiring process until you're put in a position where you actually have to hire somebody and interview somebody. So with that being said, I want to introduce our panel. Let's start with Melissa. Melissa, do you mind introducing yourself? And then we'll go Keith, Dana, and Emily from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here, Tim, amongst all these amazing people in learning. So I'm super excited to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Milloway, and I'm currently a learning experience design manager at Miro. Previous to being at Miro, so I've been here about, I think, like 9 months now. I was at Amazon for 2.5 years as a learning experience design manager as well, leading a team of 6, and also working with contingent workers, which is a fun experience too. That I don't know if we'll talk about that today, but that's a whole other ball game.
Very good. Thanks, Melissa. Keith.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Keith, and I'm currently at a company called Calibrate. I'm the head of learning ops and strategy. And I recently just came from Facebook, and I've also came from Google, YouTube, Uber. And then before that, I was in higher ed teaching ESL. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Tim, and looking forward to answering whatever questions you guys have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Keith. Dana.
Hi, I'm Dana Freeman. I am from Dallas, Texas, and I'm an original Michigander, which is why you see Detroit Tigers behind me. I work for Wayfair as a hiring manager for the Learning Experience Design team in the service organization.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dana. And Emily.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim, for bringing us all together to have this conversation. I'm thrilled to be among you.
Thank you.
My name is Emily Whitmer, and I currently work at Southwest in the Learning and Development Department. I work with a lot of people who develop training for ground operations. So a lot of airplane compliance and really fun learning solutions. Prior to Southwest Airlines, I spent a majority of my career working more in the humanitarian space. I got my start kind of as a Peace Corps volunteer and have worked in international development in the nonprofit space prior to being in corporate America. So excited to join the conversation today.
Very good. I love this. Okay, so we have a great panel of folks working in technology and airline industry. Dana, I would say you're retail, but it's it's online retail, right? So it's kind of a hybrid of technology and retail. Okay, so I have, different categories of things I want to talk about today. And the first thing I want to talk about is kind of understanding, the interview process. I think, for a lot of folks who are trying to break into our industry or get a job in instructional design, or even those who have been working in this industry for a long time, I think one of the things that's kind of hidden from people is understanding from a hiring manager standpoint what the whole total interview process looks like and the strategy behind why a candidate might interview with certain people, and also why the process takes so long. I always feel bad for candidates who feel like they're going through these like multi-week hiring processes, but once you're on the other side and you realize all the hoops you have to go through, it kind of makes sense. But I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. So I would love to know, whoever would like to kick us off, the first question I have for you, is can you share a little bit about how you like to structure your interview process? Everything from how you like to maybe review resumes to, do you typically have a recruiter review or interview first? And then how do you structure it from there? And who do you like to include in the interview process? You'd like to include members of the team? Is it just you? Is it stakeholders? Who's willing to kick us off with that? I'm curious.
Well, I can begin
Sure.
and speak on behalf of Wayfair. So at Wayfair, we have initial screening, which is done by a recruiter. And what they're looking for are, do you have the key things, the core things that we've talked about in the job posting? And do you have the education and experience similar to what we are asking for? So that's the initial screening. If you don't have all of it, it's okay, as long as you're close. If you're not close, you probably won't continue. But what you would do if you continue is move on to your resumes being reviewed by the hiring managers. We'll take a look at those on our applicant tracking system. And we will then narrow down even further which ones seem to be a better fit for our role. The thing that we're also looking for, which most people don't realize, is we're looking for a culture fit. So it's really important for us to find the right person, not just the person with the most ability and the most talent, but the person who's going to support our team and fill in the gap that the other person just left by leaving. So we're looking for key skills that may have opened up because of that person's absence. We at Wayfair don't require a portfolio. That's the first time I've been with a company that has that approach. So that's been different for me. I'm used to looking at portfolios. What we found was that sometimes people misrepresent their work and submit work done by others or things like that. So we tend to move on to the skills-based interview, and we will ask you about your skills. We will rate you on your skills and even have you self-rate your own ability on certain things like your LMS experience or your graphic design experience, multimedia, what type of authoring tools you use. Do you know project management? What type of instructional design models do you use and why? We'll ask you questions like that. And then from there, we move on to a behavioral interview. And that is really honing in on, are you going to be a good fit for our team? You've made it this far. You're looking good. We just want to make sure. So we do that behavioral interview. And then from there, the finalists will move into either a panel interview with a business stakeholder and the leader of our department, or it'll just be two separate interviews with the business stakeholder and the leader. You can tell by all of these steps that it takes time to get through. And I apologize for that. We know it takes time. We like to say it's worth the wait, and our culture is great. But I can tell you from experience, when I was hired, it took 8 weeks from the time I interviewed until I started. So that'll give you a sense of what you're waiting for. The other thing to know is if you're interviewing at a popular company like Wayfair, we get hundreds of resumes for each position. And as much as our recruiter, who works very hard, would love to respond to each and every one of you, she's unable to. And so if she doesn't, if you hear radio silence, it doesn't mean you're not being considered anymore. It just means we're trying to get through all of the other candidates so we can loop back around to you and get you through the process. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Dana. I mean, you hit on so many things I want to talk about today too, about ATS systems, because I think there's a lot of confusion about that, portfolios, and we'll get to that. But okay, so for the rest of the panel, Keith, Emily, Melissa, is your process similar, different? It sounds pretty typical from my experience, but I'm curious on your perspectives.
Yeah, can I jump in here, Tim?
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
seeing some great questions in the chat, especially about culture. I would say at Southwest and at other companies I've worked at, very similar kind of linear process, working with recruiters, doing phone screens. But I do want to emphasize this cultural fit. I understand, like, as an applicant, that can be really confusing. Like, what is culture? What do you mean by that? I think that one of the things that I love about my company is that when we talk about culture is, to us at least, like being a team player, being an ideal team player. And as we prepare for these interviews, which are in our case like panel style, and there's several rounds of them, even up through senior levels of leadership for an individual contributor position, which is rather unique. But when we talk about culture, when we look for culture, we're looking at a confluence of factors. You know, is this person demonstrating or telling stories that allow me to see if they're hungry? Are they passionate about what they're doing? Do they really want and have goals and feel motivated by this learning and development space? Can I understand that? You know, are they humble? Are they willing to make mistakes? Are they willing, to let me as a leader have grace and maybe take risks that are calculated and fail? Can we have trust? Can we be humble together? And then smart. We really look for people who are willing to understand each other, willing to have that emotional intelligence and be smart with working with other people, understanding differences, understanding that everybody has different strengths and comes with something different to offer. So it's not a matter for us, at least, of just having one of those things. It's the confluence and kind of marriage of all of them being present. And that's, I would say, first and foremost, what we really look to kind of hire for. And then skills, competencies, of course, come kind of almost secondary to that. But it's really about this cultural fit. And I think that learning and development, instructional design is a beautiful space where there's room for such diversity in skills and experience. But coming to the table, ready to be a team player, I think is something that at least we at Southwest Airlines definitely find very important.
Well, I think you bring up a really great point, Emily. Before I see if Keith or Melissa want to add anything to it, I think the thing that you mentioned that I really appreciate when we're talking about culture fit, and you talked about you want to see people's personality, you want to see, are they humble? I think what you're speaking to is the fact that hiring managers really want to see your authentic, vulnerable self. Are you willing to admit what your weaknesses are and how you're addressing them? What is your personality like? I think the biggest mistake a lot of candidates make during an interview process is they create this version of themselves that they think the company or the hiring manager wants to see, rather than just coming in and being themselves. And I know that sounds so cliche, but people want to see authentic, vulnerable people. So I completely agree with everything you mentioned there. Good.
Cool.
Mel or Keith, go ahead.
Sure, I'll jump in quickly in terms of the hiring process. So previously when I was at Facebook, it was very similar to what we were just talking about. So not going to add anything there. At Calibrate, we're a startup, and right now I'll tell you I'm hiring 4 positions. So I'm the one going in there, looking at all of the resumes, sending them through to the next round, and then having, the other interviewees, join as well too. I would say in terms of portfolio, while we prefer portfolio, we also have an exercise too, if that's not people's jam. So we're trying to make the process as easy as possible over at Calibrate. So that's kind of to paint a little picture of working at a startup compared to one of these larger corporate companies.
So let me jump in and ask this question, because Dana mentioned this a little bit. I'm curious, and I'm curious to know, as we talk about like how long the process takes, would any of you mind giving some context to some of that? Because I know, Dana, you mentioned all the different people that, people interview with, but I think a big part of it too is number of candidates and scheduling. I mean, when you're interviewing with 3 or 4 different groups, senior leaders, scheduling can be a bit of a hurdle. Is there anything else anyone else is able to add about, the length of the process?
I can talk a little bit to that and also answer just about like my experiences in the hiring process before too. So something that I do that might sound a little bit jarring and shocking to people is, and I tried to do this at Amazon as well as in this position that I'm in now, is I look at every single resume. So I make time. I ask my recruiters to allow me to do that because oftentimes like recruiters, even if we give them guidance, our roles are so specific that they may not be pulling the best candidates. It's just something that they're not doing all the time. It's not like a software engineering role where they have thousands and thousands of them. So something that I do is I look at every single resume. So for me, it's really important that like those key skills are really highlighted on there, that you're showing like a portfolio link in there. That's like number one, like please have a portfolio link if you're doing something like whether it's writing or design and development work when it comes to learning. The process, so the question about like the length of the process. So everywhere that I've been at, it's been kind of similar. So it's typically been like around, I would say like 3 or 4 weeks or so. And for me, like in finding a candidate on average, it would take me 6 months to find a learning experience design candidate to fill a position. And that's been over the past few years. The quickest that I've been able to fill a position has been 3 months. So I don't know if that gives anyone a little bit of context. It's really difficult to find great people. And the first step is like really making sure that work is reflected in your resume. What the person is looking for in their job description is reflected there.
Yeah.
So they can pull you in.
Yeah. I totally agree. Okay, so you bring up a great point, Mel, about looking at every resume. And Dana, you also you mentioned ATS systems. So there's so much out there lately about optimizing your resume for the applicant tracking system, because there's this idea that you want to stuff it with keywords and make it easily scannable, because the ATS is automatically going to filter out resumes and only pass those through that are optimized for the ATS. I'm curious to know, in all of your organizations or in your experience, of course, every company has an applicant tracking system. That's where the resumes end up. But in your experience, are any of you actually using the artificial intelligence capabilities of the applicant tracking system to filter people out? Or is that, because I've never experienced that. I like you, Mel, I reviewed every single resume. And even when I didn't, I don't believe I think the recruiters went through them manually as well. What is everyone else's experience with that?
Yeah, I've been at places before Wayfair where we actually used applicant tracking systems to filter out by keywords.
Sure.
So the core skills required would be a list of the things that we would look for. So education, automatically you're knocked out. If you're in learning and you don't have a degree, that's questionable for a lot of companies. So being able to have an education, if you're going to be in the educational field, is something that will knock you out if you don't have. Another thing is authoring tool usage. If you use a certain authoring tool and it's not on the list of things that people have asked for, that may knock you out as well. So those are the things. Look for the required skills. And if you don't have them all, still apply, but just know that the more of them that you have, the closer you are to getting the role.
Yeah. So in your experience, Dana, it would automatically knock people out then, and so that would never get reviewed by a human being. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. What about everyone else? Oh, sorry,
at Wayfair, we look at them all, but at other companies I've been at, we have knocked people out because of lacking the core required skills.
Sure. Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, so definitely this artificial intelligence is used, and depending on the company and how many applicants you get, honestly, while I love that Mel goes through and Tim goes through all of the resumes,
Yeah,
it's difficult. So some advice on that is with the keywords, look at the job description, right? And make sure you're closely aligning to that. Another thing I would say in my experience, during the interviews, I really recommend that folks don't just talk about software, right? Just about the skill set that you have, not about the tools, right? I expect at least the tools that my team works with, they're fairly intuitive to pick up. Like they're not too hard. So, again, it's about the skill set, and I would say behavioral change is the core one that we have there.
Good.
I just had something quick to add to this conversation.
Go ahead.
So like a lot of my colleagues, it seems here, we use this very manual process, kind of going through resumes. Definitely, I will say that some companies, like at Southwest Airlines, for example, we also get such a high volume of applicants that in order to kind of make that more manageable and make it so that we can kind of be fair and take a good look through all of these materials, we have very short windows of timelines that we kind of open and close our postings. So my advice to all candidates out there, if there are companies where you're like, I can get behind these values, I like this culture, I like what I'm hearing, I like what I'm seeing, definitely set up a LinkedIn job alert with those companies. Definitely kind of use like a calendar alert, even on your own like Google Calendar or Outlook, to just kind of scan certain websites, certain careers pages, if you're really interested. That's also a really good story to tell if and when you get the interview.
Yeah, I agree. I think the lesson to be learned, going back to the ATS stuff, is that everyone should be aware. Some companies do use it, and some companies don't. And sometimes, the hiring process can vary depending on the hiring manager and how involved they want to be in picking that person. The other thing, last question, I'm curious to get everyone's quick take on this. In my experience, and one of the things I always tell people when I'm giving advice is don't expect the recruiter to really, really know the ins and outs of the job or the position. Like they're recruiting not just for learning and development, but for engineering or HR or for the maintenance team. And like, they're really just making sure culture fit. And like, do you sound like a sane person? And do you match some of the things on the job description? And Melissa, I see you're shaking your head, but anyone else, is that your experience as well? Like, don't expect the recruiter to know the ins and outs of the position or the job or the team.
They may know some.
They may know some, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they may know some. They know the team. They know the leader of the team because they work with them in posting the application or postings.
Yeah.
But they don't know the ins and outs. They can't answer those. Save those questions for the hiring manager.
Yeah.
I would, I don't know. I think I'm kind of in a little bit of a unique space. I would say like the recruiters that we work with really closely actually have a really good idea kind of what our needs are, what exact skill sets we are looking for. They take a lot of time with us before we open up a post. And I think actually when I was going through the hiring process at Southwest Airlines, they were a wealth of knowledge and really helped me get an understanding of good questions to ask and how to show up in the interview to speak to certain things. So in most cases, I think that what others have said is definitely true. I think recruiters, they're hiring for a lot of different openings. But I do think I'm in a unique position being in a learning and development team of nearly 400 people. So it's very, very large, pretty robust. And our recruiters are just stellar. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. I think some teams, they might have a dedicated recruiter or set of recruiters. Others, it's whatever team's hiring right now, that recruiter gets assigned to that team, right? So I think that can vary as well. Very good. All right. Okay. Last question I have about the interview process. What if you were to list like one or two things that you want candidates asking you during the interview process? What do you want them asking you about the job, the position, about anything? What do you like to hear people ask you about anything during the interview process?
Ooh, can I jump in?
Yes, go ahead.
I love when people ask I feel like this might be a very common question. What does like an average day look like or an average week? I love that because it gives you like a really clear picture of like how much is the team engaging with me? What do my meetings look like versus like heads down work? Like what are the types of like things I'm owning and doing day to day? So I love when people ask like questions specific to like what we're doing on a daily basis.
Good. I love that. Anyone else?
I love it when people ask, what are your expectations for me 30, 60, and 90 days into the role? What will that look like? And then also asking me what success looks like in the role. I want to hear that because it tells me they're really focused on making the job successful and doing what it takes to get it done.
Good.
So I recently had this happen in an interview, and I loved it. Someone asked me, they were like, what concerns or kind of like considerations do you have about my applicancy for this role? And honestly, it's such a good way to kind of figure out if you are a good fit for that hiring manager, because it allowed me to kind of be very open and like, well, you talked about using articulate storyline, but I didn't really get a sense of like your level of application or like what kind of the parameters of the project were. So it allows me to kind of dig into that. And if there's things I didn't quite understand, we'd have clarity, you know? So It's overall a good experience, I think.
It gives that candidate a second chance to essentially, tell that story again. And that's such a more elegant way than just saying like, why wouldn't you hire me or something like that? You know what I mean? I love that question. Keith, do you have a question that you like people to ask you during the interview?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's really important to ask a question about the culture and also the values of the company, right? And a question about whether the values are actually present within the culture, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's just talk, right? But it's very important for those, those values to be there. So yeah, that's the question that I love hearing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the questions that I loved when I was hiring managers, and even when I used to interview for jobs, is I'd always love to know or be asked like, tell me about an initiative that you're working on that's not going as planned, and just to understand like the real day-to-day, what do things look like? Because sometimes in interviews, and hiring managers are guilty of this, they oftentimes talk about or they sell things in the ideal state rather than the real state of how things are currently in the organization. So like asking questions like that, gives you a good sense of what's really happening with the organization, right?
Can I bring up a red flag?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things in my lessons learned book that I'll write someday is when you're interviewing and you ask the hiring manager, describe your team, describe, what skills they bring, what skills would I do to support them and fit in with them. If they start bad-mouthing their team, if they start being critical of their team, if they start talking about how they need you to come in and fix their team, run fast and run hard away. You do not want to be in that culture. It is a toxic culture, at least under that team leader.
Yeah. Any other red flags anyone wants to share that you can think of?
Not necessarily, well, sort of a red flag, but when I've had a few applicants ask me recently, like, why should I join your company, right? Why should I join? I think it's a okay question sometimes, right? But it's also about perception too, because it goes right back to the applicant, right? It's like, well, why do you want to join the company, right? Like, I can share from my perspective, but if you don't gel with the values and what we're doing here, then no reason to continue on in the interview process.
Yeah, there's more elegant ways of asking that. Give me 3 reasons why somebody would want to work at this company. Would be a better way of asking such a question, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to chime in. It's a real red flag for me anytime an applicant asks a question that it's clear they haven't really pictured themselves in this job.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And it's real easy to tell when an applicant has not really done the due diligence of like how would I be? What would I be concerned about in this role? Or what would I be thinking about? So, yeah.
That makes sense. Good.
It.
All right, good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I had one more to add, like
Go
a red
ahead.
flag for candidates in the interview process. So if you're ever asked to do an activity for an interview process, this is a thing I think is a red flag based on like me sitting on panels for other hiring managers and reviewing activity like presentations. So you might be asked to put together like an e-learning sample and present it to a panel of people. If the people who are on the team that you would be on are a part of that panel, and the way that they're giving feedback is very like negative and not constructive or helpful, that is a huge red flag, because I think that's very telling of how you're going to get feedback on the job. And I've seen it come from other teams, not in my current organization, but like in my past, where I was like, yeah, I don't think I would necessarily want to be a part of that team, even sitting on the panel. Like, look for people who are going to ask questions like, hey, have you thought about this? Or like, oh, tell me more about your approach. Not like, I would never do that. Why would you do that? If you have people reviewing an exercise and they're coming at you in that way, that says a lot about the culture of that team, definitely, for sure, the coaching culture.
Well, let's transition to that, because I know, Keith, you mentioned that if they don't have a portfolio, you have a design activity. It was a standard practice on my team when I managed that we would do some sort of design challenge or activity, but that's very controversial. Some people say you absolutely shouldn't do that. Some people are concerned that team or that company is going to steal your idea and run off with it and not hire you. I've never heard of that happening, but I guess I can understand the concern. And I've also had people who have really given me good justifications on how it's unfair. Maybe people don't have access to the tools or time or whatever the case might be. So I'm curious to know everybody's thoughts on, having some sort of challenge, whether it's build a quick course, do a presentation as part of the interview process. Is that part of your practice or not, and why?
Yeah, so for me, one thing I talk about during that initial interview is really what we're looking for, right?
Sure.
And what I'm looking for is someone who thinks outside of the box, who's creative, who's not just kind of dealing with the status quo, right, of how things are traditionally done in the ID space.
Mm-hmm.
So the assignment that I do is more about how you would think about designing something, not within the tool, but in like Google Slides or PowerPoint. And really, then we have just a session after that where they talk through what their thoughts are. And some things to flag with that is when people are like, oh, I would create a video for this and give no context, like no reasons. I'm like, well, great, but it's kind of really thinking through how you would design something, that brings a unique aspect to it that I think is really important for a lot of these ID roles.
So you're looking for intention, right? Like, what's your intention behind why you would do a video, right? Or what informed that decision making? I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Who else?
I guess I can talk a little bit. All the companies that I've been at have either like required an activity, like it's a part of their interview process, or like where it was optional. Something that I like to do is either like share a portfolio example and walk me through it, or if someone doesn't have a portfolio example, giving them the opportunity to create something, because otherwise it's only the people who have portfolios who are really probably getting through to get that opportunity. Because if you're hiring for an e-learning developer role, or that's a big part of the role, like you want to like understand someone's thought process. Like, are they building things in a scalable way? Mm-hmm. Are they thinking through like what data we're going to collect, or are they thinking through like the visual components? Like, if they're owning that too, like, is that clear, like that there's consistency and those types of things. So for me, like having some sort of sample for roles that are doing design and development is super important to understand their thought process when it comes to making decisions. And it's mostly that. And a lot of stuff is very coachable. So if something's not perfect, nothing needs to be perfect. It's something where like you're here to build your skills with us. Like, it's not you don't have to be perfect. Like
Mhm.
there's no such thing as perfect, by the way, anyway.
No, there is not. Yeah. I think, I go back and forth on the whole idea of doing some sort of design challenge. I know you mentioned earlier, Dana, about how people, they can misrepresent work on portfolios. You can make something look, you can edit it into being something that it really wasn't originally. And, from the hiring manager standpoint, there is something very telling about giving somebody a challenge where they have a limited amount of time. How would you work under that pressure? What can you accomplish? Like, you can learn a lot about people's efficiency with tools, or how they might apply brand standards that they're not familiar with, or how they'd make an informed decision under pressure. Like, I get that from a hiring manager standpoint. That can be incredibly telling, because anybody can say that they're advanced and articulate storyline, or whatever the tool might be, right? But until you actually get to see it, it can, that can be a little bit ambiguous.
And
Anyone
advanced
else?
means,
Go ahead.
yeah, advanced means different things to different people.
Absolutely.
What
Yeah.
I think is legally defensible and fair and just and objective is to present a case to every candidate, and usually it's your finalists who you do this to, and you say, just plan to spend the afternoon with us and come in, sit down, we'll give you the software, and here's the business case, and then what type of training would you develop, and then ask them to develop a training for it, and then afterwards debrief it with them and find out their thoughts. Why did you do it this way? What were you thinking? What's going to be the benefit? What are the outcomes? And walk through like your objectives. So I notice you start with understand, help me understand that, things like that. So I think legally defensible is a good place to be when you're doing something like that.
I totally agree with you on that. Good. Any other thoughts on that?
I just have one.
Go ahead.
For candidates who are really passionate about e-learning, for a hiring manager, it is really hard and odd not to see your work in that space. So I want to call that out. I think that to Mel's point, like, a lot of companies are coachable, and especially if we talk about like more entry-level roles, we're kind of looking for someone who's like hungry and like doesn't have all the skills, like that's actually very attractive. But it is difficult, to maybe defend like, hey, this person's going to be a great e-learning developer when you don't have some sort of evidence of that. I have been in a couple situations where maybe somebody has like, content that they've signed an NDA, like they're not allowed to kind of really share it any further. There are a lot of strategies that you can implement to, like, quote, sanitize your project, remove any kind of branding or any kind of like proprietary knowledge from your content, and just mock up something so you can tell that story. Like, hey, I can't share this with you, but here's what I did, and I want to visually walk you through that story. So I want to encourage like any candidate who is passionate about e-learning, like, take a little bit of time, implement a strategy, quick and dirty. Just make sure you're able to show what you can do.
Yeah,
it'll help you.
So let's transition to that. Let's talk about portfolios. Dana, you said at Wayfair you don't require a portfolio. Mel, you talked about you've said portfolio, I think, more than anybody else on the call so far today.
I have a portfolio. My portfolio is. I have so much stuff I don't even have on my portfolio yet.
Oh, I know. So let me ask you, how important, if you're hiring somebody, say an e-learning developer or even an instructional designer, it doesn't have to just be e-learning, how important is it, or how important is it to have a portfolio as part of your hiring process?
So for me, like, it depends on the role, right?
Sure.
So it's like the type of role, but it's also like the seniority of a role. So like in the past at Amazon, there was someone that we hired on our team for a junior role, and they maybe had like 1 or 2 samples. And like when you're looking at more junior roles, so say maybe you're like a teacher and you're like coming over from like teaching and you want to get into instructional design, like have maybe like a few samples, like, and go for a role. Like, I would encourage people to go for a role that kind of fits that type of realm, because like I'm not necessarily looking for the same thing as someone who's senior versus junior or a junior role. So like if you have been in the learning industry doing e-learning development for like 10 years like me, like you should have like a portfolio of lots of different things. Like that's my expectation. Like have some video, have some like branching scenario type stuff, like show your breadth and depth of like your skills, and also like do a write-up on like what problem you're trying to solve and those types of things. So I think the portfolio needs to fit the role that you're going for and where you're at in your career. And that's like the most important thing that I would call out.
Yep, I agree. Any other thoughts on that about how important a portfolio plays?
It is. When you do a write-up on the problem you're trying to solve, though, keep that short and sweet. Focus on the results and really talk about the outcomes. So begin with words like reduced or decreased or increased or improved, and have statistics and data to back up every single thing that you've worked on. That will speak volumes.
Yep. Agreed. Good. Anyone else?
I'll chime in here, just like something small. I've been reviewing a lot of portfolios recently in hiring, and I do kind of like portfolio, like Mel mentioned, like there's a lot of different content you probably have. It's always nice to kind of see some personality in that too. I think it's a really, like a lot of us are hiring for a very creative space, and it's really cool to see people express themselves in their portfolios. I really enjoyed those projects.
Go ahead, Mel.
Oh, I wanted to plus one that because all of my portfolio examples are based on like passion projects. Like I was like, I want to do something with virtual reality, and I want to capture data using XAPI, Experience API, a way of tracking things outside of a learning management system. And I was like, I'm going to get a VR camera. Like I'm going to go down and like shoot pictures, and I'm going to build a site and do all these things. And so like, it may not necessarily translate like exactly to business outcomes, but I think it shows that curiosity of like, I'm really passionate about what I do, and I'm passionate as a builder and learning new things. And I think being able to see that in someone's portfolio and something different is definitely great too. Like it doesn't have to be related to the business, but to be able to show that you're curious and doing and learning new things is definitely important for sure.
Yeah, so I want to get more thoughts on this, because I think a lot of the rhetoric, if you will, people who give advice on building portfolios is you should build a business topic. You should build something that's, customer service skills or HR related skills or something like that. And I kind of disagree with that. When I put my hiring manager hat on, I can evaluate your instructional design ability, your technical skills, your visual design skills, your ability to use the tool, really regardless of the topic. And I'll give you a great example. I was mentoring somebody, and they wanted to build a course on like how to make different lattes, right? Or different espressos. And she was like, yeah, but that's not a business topic. And my response was like, well, what is a business topic? Like to Starbucks, that might be a business topic, right? I mean, because that's what they do, And so I agree with you, Mel, and I'm curious to get from the other panelists thoughts on that about when you look at a portfolio, if it's something crazy, like on mine, I have a course on how to cook a turkey. Does that turn you off? Or do you want to see a balance of business topics versus more personality topics? What are your thoughts there?
On my end, I think, I agree with you, Tim. I think that it's not necessarily the topics that you have there. Again, it's more of the the thought process of how you're thinking about it. And a lot of times, the HR types of things, it's like really specific company to company and all of that. I think, like how do you cook a turkey or what have you? I think things like that are easy to understand, and it helps us kind of see how you think through things.
Yeah.
One thing I see that there's a lot of teachers who are either transitioning or have already transitioned into instructional design. I would say that there actually is quite a big difference between teaching versus ID work. So I would make sure that you're not like, this is something that I created in my class, an activity or something, right? Because in instructional design, it's really about this smaller, more measurable goals rather than like a year-long curriculum that might also like ladder up to like testing or something for whatever grades. So that's what I mean. It's actually quite different. So make sure that it's something more that can be measured within that particular experience. And then also with your assignments, you're not just like throwing on like a bunch of examples. You're actually going through like the pre, during, and post kind of thought process and what you're looking for and thinking about as you're developing them. Again, it's about the thought process too, not about just like throwing examples there, right? Because that doesn't really show how you think, you know?
Yep, agreed. Any other thoughts on that? About portfolios or anything in general related to that? Okay, so let's talk about, I have this question written down, and Mel, I'm a point at you for your thoughts on this, because when we were planning this conversation, one of the things you talked about is how there's actual, how you define somebody who's entry level versus a senior role, a mid-level role. Like there's actual thought that goes behind that, and it's not just, fly by the seat of your pants. Let me ask this, and I know the answer, everyone's going to say, well, it depends on the role, but like what defines entry level? And as you're leveling a position, what kind of thinking goes behind that to justify it? And Mel, I know you have some thoughts on that, so if you don't mind starting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the most important things before you ever even open a role, like having your like actual like career leveling guidelines outlined, like what is work. And usually people will align these with like their values or principles in their job too, but like what are the skills needed at each level in this person's career? What are the tools needed? Like what does it look like using the tool even at each level if it is a tool? Cross-functionally, like what does a cross-functional relationship look like at each level? Like all those things, so many things. So someone who is at like a more junior level, I guess, or like starting level, like we may not expect them to fully lead projects on their own or lead global projects or work as cross-functionally as someone who's at like more of a senior level. But I think one of the most important things to do as a hiring manager is say, like, what do I need in this role? If I am looking to hire someone who's more junior, are they going to be set up for success in this role? Or do we need to hire more senior people and have sort of like a peer coaching situation? Like as a manager, do I have time to coach this person, or are they just going to be like left out there trying to figure everything out on their own? And that's not doing like any diligence to them whatsoever. So it's really saying like, okay, what are the roles that I need? And then what are the skills that match those roles? And then going out and finding it. And one of the things like I really try to think about too is like, if I would make an exception, if I post a senior role and there's someone who like just came out of a boot camp or is a teacher or newer to like the industry, if I were willing to open that up to them, then I need to go back and redo that whole job description, because that means there's so many people who are not applying and you're not creating that equal opportunity for them. And so if I'm willing to make that exception, I need to re-level my role, redo my role. So for me, it's really about like working backwards from like, what's the problem I'm trying to solve and filling the role for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to remember that, to your point, when a hiring manager posts a position, let's just say for an instructional designer, they're on the back end, they're leveling that role according to how they level different people on that team and what the needs are currently for their projects. And so somebody might apply for it and be an incredibly qualified instructional designer, but might be overqualified for the level at which you're working, what you're trying to fill at that moment, or underqualified. And so I think that the big lesson for anybody who's, especially those trying to break into this industry, you're trying to find somebody who's looking for the skills that match where you're at right now. And that's not going to be every position or every job. And ideally, the hiring manager and in partnership with recruiting is writing a good enough job description that will communicate that and isn't hiring entry level and saying they want 8 years of experience, right? Because that sometimes happens. But there's a lot of nuance that goes into leveling, right? And the justifications behind it. Any other thoughts on that?
I feel like I keep saying this, I agree with what Mel just said. But yeah, I wanted to kind of add to a lot of organizations will be thinking about that career trajectory, that employee engagement, and what kind of like a series of like a promotional path would be, right? So there's a lot of calibration that goes into each of these like levels. And a really great question for you as a candidate to maybe ask is, hey, what does a promotional path look like in this role, especially if you're coming into instructional design or e-learning development with a lot more experience in other industries. So make sure you're asking that question.
Yeah, I like that. Good. Okay, so let me ask this question. This was a question somebody wanted me to ask who wasn't able to attend. They said, when you write and post a job description, you as a hiring manager, what considerations do you give to those candidates who don't meet all of the desired qualifications? Do you expect to find somebody who has all that experience? And Dana, you kind of touched on this earlier, telling people, you should still apply. My general advice is I always tell people a job description is a wish list, and you're not always going to get everything you wished for, right? So thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the core skills, the key skills are what you need to really focus on. And the more that you have that match that list, the better. We put out a list that would describe our ideal candidate and what we really want. But the core key skills are what we really focus on. Those may be, like I mentioned earlier, the knockouts that keep you being considered. So if you don't know JavaScript, for instance, and it says JavaScript, HTML, and it starts asking for coding and you don't have any of it, chances are you're not going to be considered. So look for roles that you would be a good fit. The other thing is, if you're applying for jobs like that are not closely resembling your skill set, the chances of you being successful in that role are not as great. So do yourself a favor and wait and look for jobs where you can be successful, and don't get hooked into jobs because you feel desperate or because you're trying to find something where you are not set up for success because you don't match the skill set that they're looking for, and you are not able to grow those skill sets before you start.
That's such a great point, Dana. I think, and Mel, this kind of goes back to you talking about how long it takes to hire somebody or find the right candidate. At the end of the day, hiring managers do want their people to be successful. Trust me, no hiring manager, unless they're, unless they somehow enjoy this part of the process, but I've yet to meet a hiring manager who does. No hiring manager wants to performance manage somebody that they just hired, right? They want you to be successful. And that means, it might take 6 months. That's a very long time. I can't imagine, Mel, to find a candidate. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, the intent is because they want you to be successful too, right?
And happy. Yes.
And happy, yes.
Happy. Getting into a role where it's like, oh, these were not the skills I thought I was going to be using. I hate graphic design, and now I have to do graphic design. Like, it's bad for me too, and it's bad for the candidate. Like, because it's like, this is the need for the role, and now they're doing something that they hate, and you feel bad too because you're like, it's kind of my fault. Like, I'm like, I should have dug deeper. Like, I should have tried to figure this out more. Like, what did I miss? Like, yeah, like, you really want to make sure you get the right person in the right role. It's so important for everyone in the team too, and our customers and everyone. Yeah, like, it's
the team. Yeah, when you have somebody who becomes really clear that it's not the right fit, that person suffers because they're unhappy. The manager suffers, then the whole team suffers, and nobody wants that, right? I've had my fair share of that over the years. Any other thoughts on that? Go ahead, Mel.
Something else that I would call out that kind of goes back to something Dana was saying too is in the applicant like tracking systems as well, like, be really intentional about the jobs you apply to, because I think in most of them you can see if someone applied to like 80 jobs. So if it looks like you're applying to like every job in learning in the company, like, that might be a little bit like, people might be like, do you really want this job? Like,
or just any job, right?
Yeah. So it's probably good for something for folks to know too. And something that I don't necessarily know that like all hiring managers want, but I kind of love when people will just send me a quick message with their portfolio on LinkedIn. not expecting to have like a one-on-one conversation, but like I've had people who have sent me a portfolio directly, and I just clicked it, open it, and I was like, hey, recruiter, like this person's in our system, like check them out. So like I think that's like a great way to approach it too. Not expecting to like have like a full on like response or conversation though necessarily.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I've had people do that out of the blue, and I've enjoyed that as well. You know, as long as they feel really confident about the job and they have a portfolio or something for you to look at, not just a unsolicited message of, hey, I'm interested. That's probably not going to get you a response. Good. All right. Before we jump to the Q&A, any other thoughts? All right. Good. Well, we have a whole boatload of questions, and it's usually at this point my contacts start getting wonky. So if it looks like I'm leaning in, it's because my contacts are wonky. Okay, so we have tons of questions, and folks had an opportunity to upvote on them. So I'm going to answer the questions in the order in which received the most upvotes. Let me just scroll through it. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Anne wants to know, what are some typical behavioral interview questions that you ask candidates during the interview process?
Well, one thing on my end, I would say that I ask candidates to describe a project that they've worked on, right, from start to finish. And I'll tell you, that's a broad question, right? But I'm listening for things that relate to behavior change, right? And so I just want to say that, like, maybe you're not being asked specific questions about behavior change, but that's definitely something that you need to focus on when you answer questions.
Sure. Good. Anyone else?
I'll throw one out there. In instructional design, in e-learning development, you work with a lot of different people, a lot of different stakeholders, and we get a lot of different types of feedback on our projects, on our working relationships, all across the board, right? So one of my favorite behavioral questions to ask is about a time when you received some critical feedback, or constructive feedback rather, and I'm curious just to hear like what the feedback was and like what the outcome was. And this, again, I was talking earlier about like hiring for people who are like hungry, humble, and smart. I kind of like look through that lens when I hear that response. I want to know if you're willing to kind of share and be vulnerable and be honest and authentic about that. Because we've all been there, right? Like we've all been in that space. So that's one of my favorites.
I had somebody send me, they applied for a job, and as part of submitting their resume, they were tasked with drafting a response to this hypothetical stakeholder email. And the email was, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Instructional Designer, we love the video you created that's launching tomorrow, but all of these different words are changing because something changed. How would you respond to that? And can we still get it done by tomorrow? And I love that, because what they're looking for is how you would negotiate that situation, right? The answer isn't just say yes or just say no. It's how are you going to open a negotiation with that stakeholder to make them happy and also still get the job done and all of that stuff, right?
I want to plus one that too, Tim,
Yeah.
because the one that I would ask in my like previous role a lot was around like common scenarios we would always have. Like our stakeholders would come to us and they'd be like, we needed an e-learning and it has to be an e-learning and it has to be done this way, and like very prescriptive. And like, how do you handle when a stakeholder comes to you? Tell me about a time when a stakeholder brought a solution to you when like you yourself are kind of trying to like be that like instructional designer and work backwards from the problem and see, is learning the problem, what's the best solution for this? So like asking like them to tell about a time when someone came to them with the solution, and how did they handle that and what did they do? I think that kind of goes along with what you're talking about. That's like a common one I asked.
Yep. Okay, good. I'm going to do the next question. I really like this one. This one I think will be very revealing. Okay, so Lindsay wants to know, if we don't have specific experiences in instructional design or e-learning, would putting LinkedIn learning certificates or maybe ATD certificates in your resume help you? What about things like Tim's course and his certificate, or any of the other boot camps or master classes out there? Before you all answer, I'll tell you what my thoughts are on that, just because I'm biased. And of course, I have my own online thing. It's not about the certificate. It's about, can you do the things the certificate taught you, right? That would be my opinion on it. It's less about the certificate. It's, are you able to apply the skills that you earned through that certificate program? But to the panel, I open that up to you. How important do certificates, wherever they come from, play as part of your decision making?
Totally agree with that. And I would say, especially like LinkedIn Learning, it's great to absorb the content, right? But that's not really showing that you're actually able to apply it, and apply it to different situations, right? So I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there are specific kind of certifications that I think are really great to see. I'm not sure if I should mention them. But yeah, I would say ones that focus on like the creative aspect of instructional design. I know I keep on talking about this creativity piece,
Yeah.
but I would say that there are like a lot of extremely traditional instructional design programs that go through ADDIE, right? And ADDIE is fine, but that's just a process, right? Like,
right.
you need to be able to apply it. So programs, when you're scouting out and looking for programs, really look at ones that are looking at the realistic view of how things work. So I'll tell you, ADDIE, even the SAM model, they're just models, and really it's a little bit messier, or
so much messier.
Yeah, in reality, right? So yeah, that's just my thought on that.
I agree. It's one thing to be able to define what SAM is or what ADDIE is, but in the real world, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, nothing ever goes according to any of those models or processes. So it's one thing to know it. It's another thing, how are you going to adapt when the stakeholder knocks on your door at 5 p.m. on a Friday, ready for you to change the entire thing that you're building, right? Anyone other thoughts on those certificates, badges, online certifications, anything like that? Okay, good. All right, our next question comes from April, and looks like we lost Dana, but she'll probably come back here in a moment. April Hastings. April wants to know, what is the best question you received from an interviewer that wowed you? From an interviewer that wowed you? Any thoughts on that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now,
okay,
Dana.
Good.
Hi.
Okay, good. Hi. I had an interviewer ask me how I arrived at ROI, so return on investment, for, if I say I know how to do all of Kirkpatrick's levels, then I need to be able to back it up and talk through how I arrive at that. So just make sure that you understand how to do it and give examples of how you've done it.
Good. Anyone else?
So I guess the niche that I work in, have worked in for the past few years, is customer education. And in a lot of ways, there's differences in customer education compared to internal. So question that I received is how do you see those differences? And how are you able to adjust what you do for that customer space, which is, again, quite different than internal?
Good. I'll share mine. This one I really appreciated from this particular interviewer who was interviewing me for this corporate job several years ago. One of the questions I always hate getting asked, and I never ask, is like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because I feel like it's a trap to be like, I see myself here on your team, promoted, and everyone's going to be happy, right? I hate that question. And it assumes, you're just going to stay at that company forever. So this person asked me, where do you see yourself after your time here? And I really appreciated that, because I felt like it was like this refreshing, realistic admission that your time at that company, likely, as somebody who at the time was in my early 30s, is temporary. Like, the likelihood that I was going to stay there forever and retire from that company, or the likelihood that any of you are going to stay at the companies you're at and retire from, is probably unlikely, right? And I really appreciated that person gave me an opportunity to really be truthful about the vision I had for myself for my career. That wasn't some weird, BS answer about like, I'm going to be working for you, hire me. I don't know. Does that resonate with anybody?
Without a doubt. And I'll tell you, I mean, I answer that question and very truthfully, I say like, well, for me, I want to grow in my career, right? So I talk about how I would apply what I hope to be currently doing into future roles. Yeah, and I don't know, it's gotten me this far, so I guess it works, or I don't know.
Any other thoughts on that or perspectives?
I had like this is kind of separate from that, but I had the interview that I remember the most is one of my first interviews after grad school, and it was for what was ING at the time, the bank. And I went in and they actually brought and showed their own e-learning that they did. And they asked me to like deconstruct it. Like, how did we build this? And I think that was it was nice to see their work, like at being in the interview process. And they asked me because it was a very technical role. So they were asking me about that. And I kind of loved it. I don't do that in my interview process, but like, I kind of love it to like be able to see what the work of that team looks like.
That's a great point. I've done that before in an interview where I've asked, and I do this with clients when they're asking, when I'm trying to figure out if I'm a good fit for them as a freelance developer, is I ask them like, can you show me your best example of work that your team does and the one that has the biggest area of opportunity, just so I can kind of see like, are my expectations of what's good your expectations of what's good, right? Because that's all relative. So I love that. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to share my favorite kind of question that I was asked as a candidate. I had a hiring manager kind of really have that moment where I felt like they saw me. So they asked me, they were like, "Hey, Emily, you speak multiple languages. How does that influence your learning design? How does that influence you as a designer to develop solutions?" And it gave me this chance to really be open and authentic and talk to life experience and how, so look for people who interview you and who really see you and see these nuances that speak to who you are and the real value that you bring as a person.
Yeah, they're asking questions, not just off the list, but asking questions about you, right? Yeah. I like that. Okay, good. All right. Let's do our next question from Heidi. Okay, so when you see a few different tools listed in the job description, Articulate, Adobe Captivate, etc., do you expect the applicant to have experience in all of them?
I definitely don't. And I'll tell you, I'm not sure if all the other panelists agree with me on this, but I don't care as much about that. So I definitely feel that a lot of those tools you can learn on the job. And also there are a lot of classes you can take, even though I know I just said some things about LinkedIn Learning. I mean, you can kind of get started through going through those classes. It's again, more about the thought process.
Yeah, well, I'll take this moment to plug my LinkedIn Learning course on Storyline if you're looking to learn Storyline. But you have to apply it. You have to put those things in practice. You can't just watch LinkedIn and then, it's not like the Matrix, right? I don't know. Any other thoughts on that? Do you expect people to be able to have all the tools? I think it depends on the role, but any other thoughts?
It depends on the role. And for me, it's less about which tool and more about the skill set. So if you're going to be creating very complex wayfinding type stuff in Storyline, so you're answering a bunch of questions and it's spitting out what you need to be able to do on the job or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have that skill in Storyline, because there's other authoring tools that are similar. Twine is one. It's conditions. Does this person understand conditions? Does this person understand how layers work, how these certain things work? It's not about the tool, it's about what you need to be able to do within the tool. So it's not about the UI or like the buttonology, as people would call it. It's about the skill set to be able to jump into the tool and get up to speed in it really quickly. If you don't have that foundation knowledge and skills, like you can't, like if you know one authoring tool, chances are like if a lot of them, they're all very similar in ways, like you can learn another one very quickly.
Yeah, I think the key, I mean, if the hiring manager is savvy enough, they will have put in there something like you know, capable of using Storyline, Captivate, or similar. Like they're letting you know that like they're just looking like, do you understand how to develop e-learning with a variety of different tools? You know, I think if they're looking for somebody that's the Storyline, hopefully they're just being really specific about it or whatever it might be.
When I think about it, I think about like a repairman showing up to my door. The business card in our industry would be our portfolio. It gets us to the door. But him carrying a toolbox with only one tool in his kit is not going to give me reassurance that he can do the job. So the more tools I see in his kit, the more reassured I am that he can actually fix my broken washer or whatever it is. Yeah.
That makes me wonder about everyone's thoughts on, I'm sure many of you have heard of like T-shaped employees, like talking about broad capability, but deep expertise. You know, one of the things I always try to tell people, and it's been true for me and the people I hire for is, you know, even let's just say you're hiring somebody who's going to primarily do e-learning development, right? You still want them to have broad capability because you never know what the business is going to throw at you and what capacity is going to look like. So you want somebody who can, if you need them to, jump in and do some stakeholder management or create an ILT course or do consulting. Is that kind of what you're talking about, Dana, about like broad capability?
Yeah. So, you know, like I said earlier too, the more of the core skills or requirements you have, the closer you are to getting the job. So the more you can, oops, there goes my phone. The more that you can, the more that you can match what they're asking for, the better of a chance you have.
Good. Okay. Good. Go ahead, Keith.
Sorry. Okay.
One
thing I would add, and this might be different in the customer education space, but definitely for instructional designers, it's like having those core competencies, you know, and then a little bit of like understanding graphic design and kind of imagining and creating storyboards for that. But on my end, like I have graphic designers, I have animators, you know, I have all those other real specialty niche folks that like you're communicating with them and working with them, but like you're not developing that because it needs to be something that is going out to customers, right? So it's a different, I don't know, honestly, I think it's a different caliber in terms of like the visual design, animation design, and all of that.
I think go ahead, Mel. Go ahead.
I plus one that because Keith and I are both in customer education, and so like so for me, like I want people to have at least the foundation skills to talk the language to be able to work with multimedia people. Like it doesn't mean they have to be the best graphic designers for e-learning developers, but they have to be able to like have some foundational knowledge to be able to have informed conversations and those types of things.
Well, I think what this brings up is a great point about how, you know, every learning team, every instructional design team, you know, they could have, you know, if you look at two companies, let's say, you know, Emily's company at Southwest Airlines and Keith's company at Calibrate, two roles called instructional designers where the day-to-day job looks entirely different, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it speaks to the fact that every instructional design team works differently. Some instructional design teams, the instructional designer does everything A to Z, the needs analysis, stakeholder management, project management, design and development and implementation and evaluation. Whereas Keith, and I'm sure this is true for you, Mel, like your instructional designers are probably not doing the video editing or the motion graphics. They have dedicated folks to do that, right? And so, you know, it's important to remember too, that when you apply for an instructional design role, and this is something you should ask during the interview process, is how is the team structured? What does the workflow look like? Because if you're really passionate as a developer, you know, doing graphic design work or visual design work, you know, you may or may not be able to do that depending on how the team is structured.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for validating me. Okay. Let's go to our next. Go ahead.
every single roles, every role that I've ever had in the learning field has been very different from the next. I mean, like similarities, but very different, I would say.
Yeah, and one thing to add on that, so like my first instructional design job was actually working at a university. And that's extremely different. I was working with professors who are building the courses, right? And kind of giving them some more technology tools and helping them structure their course from an instructional design lens. But it's like night and day with what we do in the corporate realm. So just want to call that out again, because there's, calling out to all my peeps who are in K through 12 and higher ed, that it's very different on that end.
Totally. Well, let's get to a question about that. Actually, there is the next question I was going to ask was from Trisha. So do you have suggestions for entry-level ID roles for someone, transitioning teacher, that doesn't have specific degrees or certification in ID? I guess the question is like, there's so many teachers wanting to transition into this. Like, what's your advice for them on landing a role when they don't have that direct on-the-job experience yet?
I'll speak up to this one if you don't mind.
Ahead.
So one of the things that I would definitely do is speak more, less about the pedagogy and more about the andragogy and adult learning, and that you understand adult learning concepts and techniques, and that you are able to translate what you've done into those. I've had people who have actually approached me to be a mentor and have asked me to mentor them for several months so that I can teach them how to do certain things, and then they can use those as work examples. Also, I've had people who have approached companies and said, can I be an intern for free for 3 months or something like that? And able to work on a specific project as like a contractor type of thing. Don't pay me. I just need to be able to show work products. And a lot of companies really have a heart for people and want to help. And that helps them as well. So there are different ways to be able to get that corporate experience. The thing that scares companies about people who don't have corporate experience is we have a completely different pace. We pivot from moment to moment. Things change overnight, and you cannot, like, if your design, what you're designing is your baby, somebody's going to call your baby ugly, and you have to be able to take it.
I'm so glad I'm not the only one who uses that phrase.
Yeah, you have to grab
ugly babies.
another baby. You have to have another baby real fast. And so, we tell people like our turnaround time is 3 weeks for a course. People freak out. When I was in banking, it was 6 months for a course. So it varies from industry to industry. It varies depending on how your team is set up, whether you're broad-based like we just discussed, or whether you're you have a bunch of experts who do one thing and you toss it over the wall to each other. And, teaching is not like that. You've got your room, you're there, you've got control. In our world, we don't have a lot of control. We are reactive and responsive, and we have to be able to nimbly and agilely move from one thing to the next without losing momentum or focus.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Advice for teachers transitioning?
My sister's a teacher, and she just started teaching. And I want to say, everyone who's a teacher on here, bless you. I hear so many stories. I cannot empathize enough with that. But so one of the things I recommend is looking at companies who they'll allow you to do stretch assignments and things like that. I worked at this commercial real estate company, Jones Lang LaSalle, and some of the folks who came onto our team came from different areas in the business. So if you want to transition into learning from another area, sometimes it's easier to do that and say get in. Amazon, it does a really great job of this too. Get in as a learning coordinator at Amazon, an executive assistant, some other role, and they have thousands of people in learning. You can easily get a mentor, transfer to a team. Look at those sorts of ways to get in. Also, maybe do consulting work. I started doing consulting work to build my e-learning portfolio. I did work on Upwork, which is they would take screenshots of my computer screen as I was working. I was I was hungry. I was I want to become an e-learning developer. So I was I'll do whatever it takes. So I was you can pay me $10. It's fine. I just needed to be able to show those skills. So those are two ways that can kind of help you to transition into that kind of a career, I think.
Yeah. Go ahead, Keith.
Sorry. I agree. One thing I would also consider for teachers is looking for contract roles. I know for me, when I was at Google, we did a lot of contractor hiring, right? And even at Facebook too. So I would consider that. I know that the security, a lot of teachers they're concerned about the security in these ID roles, and that is a concern for contractor roles. But like it's a new area, right? So you need to take risks in order to be able to move into those full-time positions a lot of time. So I just want to put that out there, as don't just see full-time roles as the only area that you're looking for. Also, contractor roles can be really great too.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the comments that everyone has already said about this. I think just one additional one I'll make is I have several, previous K through 12 teachers on my team. They're successful. They bring a lot of really important skills and experiences to our team. They're deeply appreciated and loved. I will say, if you're coming from the K-12 space, in addition to like Upwork is awesome. I've also done contract work there. In addition to getting some experience in a variety of ways that the other speakers have kind of gone over, be prepared to tell your story. Talk about your story. Take me through what in your K-12 experience ties and has led you here, because there are some core values and there are some pieces of your being that are really important that we want you to show up with, so just kind of taking hiring managers through that journey and demonstrating that in your portfolio if you can. Those are just two additional kind of pieces of advice I would offer.
Yeah, I like that. I think the advice I'd give, and I've given this before, is I use this phrase, excruciatingly transparent. I think it's important to be excruciatingly transparent. It goes into being vulnerable and authentic. But the thing I always tell people is, if there's something that you are concerned that the hiring manager is worried about, you don't have the right skill or you don't have that corporate experience, right? Address it front on during the interview. Just tell the hiring manager, I realize I don't have the corporate experience, and this is probably some of your concerns, and here's what I'm doing to work through that, or I'm willing to do. Just saying that takes that elephant out of the room, and it tells the hiring manager, they go, oh gosh, this person is self-aware, right? And they're willing to grow. And so it goes back to what I said earlier, don't create this version of yourself that you think the hiring manager wants. Because here's what happens. If you get that version you created of whoever that is gets hired, well, then that hiring manager is expecting that person to show up every day. And then you can't keep that facade going. And then you end up failing, and it's just not fun, right? It's not fun for you. It's not fun for the hiring manager. So just be upfront and honest and self-aware, and hopefully try to find a position where your current skills align with the skills that they're looking for. Yeah. Okay. Rolanda wants to know, and we have about a little less than 10 minutes left, so we'll get to one or two more questions. Rolanda wants to know, what is the culture fit that person needs to fit into? Culture fit can be a barrier for a lot of people. What does that mean when you're looking for somebody, when they say, we're looking for a good culture fit? What does that mean for each of you?
Well, one thing I would say, in particular at Facebook, that was actually something that we needed to avoid, culture fit, right? That's the core competencies that we needed to look for. One thing, though, I would say when I do hire, looking for diversity, right? When I say diversity, I don't necessarily mean ethnic diversity or even gender diversity per se, but it's diversity in your skill set, right? As it's important to have different skill sets on your team. So that's one consideration when you're interviewing.
And when we say culture fit at Wayfair, we're talking about our people principles. So those are really important to us. Collaboration is super important. So we need to know if you have a collaborative approach to partnering with others. And can you demonstrate that through giving examples of how you've done that in the past? I know Amazon has their principles that they use, and they ask, their questions, and you have to respond with a star answer. STAR being the method for which you answer questions. And we can maybe talk about that in a minute. But yeah, so really it's talking, the culture fit is really, are you going to be successful in the principles, living by the principles by which we adhere to day by day, I guess is the best way to put it. And we just want to make sure that you're going to be successful. We don't want you to come in and be miserable because you don't believe in our culture and our people principles. This isn't the place for you.
Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts on culture fit?
Yeah, at some companies, I would say culture fit is a way to say, like, do we like you? So just be aware of that. But I don't see culture fit as that. But a lot of folks do see that. I would say, especially people who are hiring for instructional designers, but don't have an ID background, like program managers, other types of directors, so just be thoughtful of that. Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. I feel like I hit on this pretty hard earlier on in the conversation, at least for, the Southwest Airlines approach, but we're really passionate about culture, as it relates to the application of our values. And we look for those throughout the interview and those examples that are brought up in the way that you talk about, maybe previous experiences you've had or people you've worked with. I will also say, I don't know, Southwest is probably not the most corporate-y of corporate environments. We regularly tell each other that we love each other, oh, love you guys. It's a little counterculture. But one of the things that is really kind of powerful in our culture is to Keith's point about diversity, we're a strengths-based organization. So going through the process of understanding your strengths, the people on your team, what their strengths are, giving people a language to talk about their preferences and what they bring to the table and how they show up is really kind of a powerful culture tool for us. And so when I'm hiring for people, I know my team, I know their strengths. I know if they're strategic or they're more relationship building. And so I'm kind of also looking for that in terms of bringing more diversity to my team as well. So I'll stop there. I could talk about culture all day. And I do understand that it, to Keith's point earlier, it can be this amorphous kind of barrier that excludes people. I think finding a fit where people are talking about culture in a very, talk about the application of it. I'll stop there. I'll just stop.
I think that makes sense. And it's not just the company, the organization trying to make sure you, the candidate, are a culture fit. You want to make sure the organization's a good culture fit for you. Not all corporate cultures, even when they have amazing core values posted all over the office, they don't always live up to those values. And so the sooner you can, on either side of that hiring table, come to terms with whether or not it's a good fit or not culturally, the better. And as a candidate, if you get those red flags in the back of your mind where it doesn't feel like that hiring manager, that team, that organization, is a good fit, trust me, you'd rather find out during that interview than once you're on the job. You've dodged a bullet, right? Okay, we're down to our last 3 minutes. So last question I want to ask everybody, and let's go around the table. What's your just number one piece of advice? If you were to these are your last words, you're going to give advice on interviewing, applying for jobs, hiring. What is that piece of advice going to be? Whoever wants to start.
I'll just say 2 things really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
First one is, I've been in this industry a long time. I started with very smart people who didn't keep up because our industry changes every day. You need to stay current on what's happening in the industry week by week, or you become an ID dinosaur. A lot of my friends from long ago have become ID dinosaurs, and they lose relevancy. Don't let that happen to your career. The other thing is, do not listen to those academies who are out there saying you will get 6 figures when you get out of this academy. I know people who have been in this industry for 20 years who are just now hitting 95,000 base. So, and those are IDs. And managers I know some who are making 80,000 base. So do not listen to the 6-figure dream It can happen for you if you work hard and you stay at it, but it does not happen to everybody, and it does not happen right away.
Yeah, it's a great point. And our next community roundtable next month will actually be on that topic of salaries, because of a lot of that magical thinking that's out there about, this mystical 6-figure job available to anybody. So we'll definitely talk about that. Thank you, Dana. Okay, who's next? Number one piece of advice before we close out.
Yeah, I would say be authentic. Be authentic. Okay, that's mine.
I know it's so cliche saying just be yourself. Like, no, but really, like, we'll just say be authentic and vulnerable is the new version of just be yourself.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
I'm gonna chime in. Like, Keith, you stole it. Like, that was exactly my advice. Like, the goal of your whole process should not be to have a performance or to be good. It should be to be yourself. It's the best thing you can be.
Yeah, I agreed. All right, Mel, you have to top it off with your final bit of advice.
Mine comes from Brent Schlenker, who he's one of the folks in our learning industry. It does some really great stuff. And identify your non-starters. Identify what are you looking for in your career? If this role doesn't have e-learning development and that's what you're passionate about, like, make sure that your portfolio reflects it. Make sure your resume reflects it. Like identify what are your absolute needs for your career and look for those jobs. I think it's so important.
Yeah, I'll end with that. I love that advice. I'll build upon that. I think my number one bit of advice is to remember constantly, and you have to remind yourself of this, but remember your career is bigger than any one team, organization, hiring manager, or company. So to your point, Mel, when you're considering whether or not a job is right for you or whatever the case might be, it's about whether or not it fits within your career. I love that. All right. Well, I want to thank our panel. Thank you so much, Mel, Keith, Dana, and Emily, for joining us. On behalf of all of them, if you have additional questions or want to connect with them, I'm sure they'd be more than happy with you reaching out on LinkedIn. And that includes myself as well. And of course, if you happen to be watching the recording of this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell button. I'm going to put a couple of links in chat where you can check out our full schedule of future events. Like I said, we'll have an upcoming one talking about salaries and pay within our industry. And then, of course, if you want to learn more about learning storyline or building your portfolio, you can check me out at the eLearning Designers Academy. All right. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, panel. It was great talking with all of you.